Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Stills, or back to Stills, if you've been with us for the 3 events before in this programme, called Glips, which is our film screening programme. My name's Neil Cox, and I'm the Director of the Art Streams Research Partnership, and I'm here to facilitate this event this evening, featuring a film called Red Tape by Viola. The Art Streams Research Partnership, you probably know already, but I'll say it again, exists to do high quality research and public engagement events around the collection artist rooms, quite through the generosity of Anthony Doffey, thanks to the Art Fund, Arts Council and the Lottery, and jointly owned by National Galleries Scotland and Tate, and comprising works by 38 artists and something like 1,600 works, but I keep saying different figures, and one day we'll find out how many works there really are. They keep changing because we keep adding new artists and new collections, including the Roy Lichtenstein material that's on view at the moment in Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art in Edinburgh. So these events, Clips, are one of the series of public events we've been running. These are an original and a new experiment curated by Tom Flanagan. Where are you, Tom? There he is. And Noi Chen, who's behind it. There you go. And we hope to run more of these film screenings next year, meaning in university speak, starting something like October. The format of these events is a bit like the other series of events we run, Café des Artistes, involving a bit of a talk, exploring some material around an artist, and space for public discussion. And we're going to build in some time this evening for public discussion, and that will mean it will be like in one of those churches where they ask you to hug your neighbour, all right? But you know, we want to talk with you and for everyone to talk to each other about this material. There was a famous art historian called Erwin Panofsky who used to shout at the slide projection person at the back of the room, "Next slide, please." Like our Facebook page, find out what we're doing. We're trying to get, that's out of date. We've got more likes than that. 300 and some odd, I don't know how many. There we are, Bill Viola's Red Tape. So I'm going to talk to you now about this, and the reason why I'm talking is that our speaker, Rina Arya, who is a reader in visual communication at the University of Wolverhampton, got stuck in, where'd she get stuck? Darlington. On the way here, and wasn't going to make it to 8:30, so I'm afraid she's turned back. The good news is she sent her talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you Rina's talk, as if I'm Rina, before we watch the film. So this is a kind of general introduction to Bill Viola, just give you a bit of context around this artist. How many people have seen work by Bill Viola before? A lot of people. That's interesting, isn't it? General introduction to Bill Viola, and then we'll watch the film, then we'll have a break, drink more wine, which loosens our tongues, okay, and then we're going to come back and talk about some questions which Rina has posed for us, and just sort of explore some issues around this movie, our perceptions of it, and so on. There are 2 works by Bill Viola in the Art Streams collection, 2 video works, and I'll sort of say something about those, I think, as I speak like Rina as we go along. And we may be able to just show you a couple of pictures of things in a minute. So, Bill Viola, who was born in 1951, is an American video artist who employs electronic sound and image technology to create an extensive range of works, such as videotapes, architectonic video installations and flat panel video pieces. He studied at Syracuse University in the early 1970s, starting in painting and electronic music before specialising in video. He's been central in establishing the contemporaneity of video art and in expanding its possibilities through his innovative explorations of content and form. Rhys Davies discusses two main phases in Viola's work. The first in the 1970s and 1980s, where he developed the creative and technical possibilities of the video art genre. The second, more current, phase focuses on the three-dimensionality of the installation, where the panels are set up to convey metaphorical space. And today we're going to be very much in that first phase, creative possibilities of video art that the film we're going to see. Another change evident in his work is his use of other figures. In his early work, Viola almost solely concentrated on himself and his identity as the subject. As his work developed, he turned the focus onto other figures, mostly unfamiliar people who operated as everyman type figures. In Nantes Triptych of 1992, he used footage of his dying mother, which maximised the emotional impact of this work. How many people have seen Nantes Triptych, by the way? Yeah, some people. Yeah. His work has been described as a totalising art form on sound as much as visuals. I guess it's like that Wagnerian idea of a total work of art. There's video work, but there's very important sound imagery in it as well. It involves much more than a simple interaction between the viewer and what's projected on screen and the objects in the space. He Weeps for You, that's the title of a video from 1976, demonstrates this synchronicity between the viewer, the objects, and the spatio-temporal projection. A drop of water emerges from a small brass spigot. As the drop emerges, it's magnified by a video camera and projected onto a large screen. The close-up image reveals that the viewer and the part of the room where they stand are visible inside each forming drop. So I guess it's like the drop as a kind of mirror of what's in the room. The viewer sees each drop expand, and as it falls, it lands on an amplified drum. A new drop immediately begins forming, and the cycle continues in an infinite repetition. In this talk, there are two concepts that I want to address because they encapsulate his work. These are the spiritual and the sublime. So brace yourselves. Then we're doing the spiritual and sublime now, next part of this talk. To start with, we'll look at the spiritual. Viola's works have often been described as spiritual because they involve an engagement, a meditation on the big questions in life. They're about the human condition, which is the condition that all humans face by virtue of being embodied, and it involves thinking about purpose, suffering, alienation, and death. We try to transcend our limited states in various ways through human interaction and communion, but ultimately we are alone. Viola reflects this predicament by showing figures that are frequently on their own. Brought up as an Episcopalian, Viola has had a varied and eclectic interest in different spiritualities from both Eastern and Western traditions, often combining them in his work. Many of the titles of his works are explicitly Christian, such as The Passions, 2003 to 2005, and Transfigurations, 2008. And we have one of the works from the Passions series in the Artist Rooms collection. Furthermore, he employs motifs and other iconographical features of Western art, especially from the Renaissance. However, rather than making specific allusions to Christianity, he wanted to evoke a religio-mythological universe where he tapped into the emotions opened up by the myths and used the titles metaphorically or poetically. Viola believes the ultimate spiritual condition transcends specific traditions and is shared by the whole of humanity. This is reflected in his outlook, where his art is for all. The religious and spiritual dimensions of Viola's work have increasingly been recognised by commentators, a fact that is reflected in his commissions for religious spaces and recognition by bodies that promote the academic study of religion. So in 1996, he installed the Messenger in Durham Cathedral. Did anyone see that? In 2007, he was awarded the American Academy of Religion and Arts Award as recognition for his contribution in the field. In 2009, he was commissioned by the Anglican Church to create art for permanent loan to St Paul's Cathedral, which resulted in a piece called Martyrs, Earth, Air, Fire and Water. in 2014, which shows 4 individuals, one on each plasma screen, being martyred by the 4 classical elements. And a further piece, Mary, which will be unveiled later this year. However, in spite of such recognition by the Christian Church, Viola is clear that his interest in spirituality is neither creedal nor dogmatic. He does not have knowledge that he wants to pass on, but merely wants viewers to experience emotional engagement with his work, which many purport to do. He mentions that the following figures as ideas and ideas as being ongoing influences. The Ceylonese philosopher Ananda Kumaraswamy, I knew that was going to happen, Kumaraswamy, and the Japanese writer, translator D.T. Suzuki, who was instrumental in spreading Zen and other Far Eastern philosophies to the West, and mysticism in the writings of St. John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart, and Islamic Sufism. Zen Buddhism, which he practiced during his 1-year sojourn in Japan, so he was in Japan from 1980 to 81, had a particularly strong influence on his mindset. The role of Zen is central in the reception of his art and in its encouraging mindful reflection on everyday life and of looking inward as the source of enlightenment. We can describe his works as spiritual exercises where, through attending to what is before us, we gradually become absorbed in the sights and sounds, which leads to a profound reflection and a deeper understanding of life. One distinctive feature of Viola's work is that he reinforces the embodied condition of humanity, part of human struggle it brought about from the fact that we are enfleshed and have to come to terms with natural bodily processes involving decaying and our isolation from others. Although we cannot escape from embodiment, we can experience transformation through ritualized practices, which we see in the interaction that many of his figures have with the natural elements. In 5 Angels for the Millennium, which is a piece I think is in the Tate collection, I don't think Santa reads that one, the submerged figure under the body of water ascends into mid-air, thus breaking through the boundary threshold of 2 states between water and air. It is this activity of transcending limits that has led commentators to use the concept of the sublime to describe the effects of Viola's works. Philip Shaw describes sublimity as referring to the movement when the ability to apprehend, to know, and to express a thought or sensation is defeated. Yet through this defeat, the mind gets a feeling for that which lies beyond thought and language. Viola's work is excessive sometimes in scale, but always in the simulacrum of reality, where we see figures in situations of extreme emotional intensity, such as being underwater, walking through fire, being born. Coupled with this are the visual and auditory effects, which serve to exacerbate the sensations. That's manifested in a number of ways, such as the dissonance between the visual and auditory. What we hear is not always matched by what we see. I'll talk about that in a moment. An example of this in 5 Angels of the Millennium. At heightened scale, the visuals and sounds become abstract and defy our own capacity to control what we're being exposed to. Other technical interventions that heighten perception include the slow motion sequences. The display of the work in a darkened room serves to further enhance the loss of control experienced by the spectator. 5 Angels for the Millennium consists of 5 video sequences: Ascending Angel, Creation Angel, Fire Angel, Birth Angel, and Departing Angel. Do come in, sit down, it's okay. Each video is projected directly onto a wall in a dark room and shows a male figure submerging in or re-emerging from water, at times diving into the water's surface and at other times hovering over it. These actions occur in a continuous loop, which are enhanced by a soundtrack of underwater noises, including the crashing of waves and colour changes from blood red to grey-blue. The action of the figure seems fairly simple in that we're looking at the rise and fall of a figure above or below a body of water. However, it soon becomes clear that the trajectory of the figure is not straightforward. Viola runs the sequences in slow motion. He also varies the direction of events so that the sequence is run backwards as well as forwards, upside down as well as the right way up. An additional factor is the soundtrack of crashing waves, which does not correspond with the instant that the figure hits the surface of the water. Although there is a build-up to the climax, the timing of the crash remains unpredictable and as a result is entirely arresting. The combination of factors, life size scale of the figures and the speed, order and sensation of these sequences is disorienting and contributes to the overriding sense of the sublime. In the Critique of Judgment of 1790, Kant describes the sublime as referring to things which are formless or which have form but, for reasons of size, exceed our ability to perceive such form. Viola's five angels are life-size, but their scattered placements, as well as the sensory effects that accompany the movement of the figures, make the overall image formless. A viewer simply cannot take it all in and is completely overwhelmed. The work evokes the duality of the sublime. It plays on our primal fear of drowning, while also introducing passages of wonder, namely when the figure emerges from the surface of the water and hovers in midair, which defies all expectations. The shift of all aspects of the video, from the direction of movement of the figure to the sound to the alteration of colour, contributes to the sensory overload. Edmund Burke's philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful of 1757 lists certain qualities that give rise to the experience of the sublime. These include vastness, infinity, magnificence, succession and uniformity, all of which Five Angels exhibits. The scale is vast, the projections of the figures create the perspective of infinity, they display magnificence, and the rise and fall demonstrates succession and uniformity. And infinity, as the cycle never ends. Burke also includes obscurity, which is also applicable in this context. With Five Angels, the darkness of the room, the unpredictability of the sequence of events, including the movements of the figures and accompanying colour and sounds, is obfuscated. Although a large majority of his works heighten our perceptions and stir our senses, there are others that are remarkably mundane. In Catherine's Room, which is an artist's room's work, we're faced with a 5-part presentation where Catherine is engaged in different activities such as performing yoga and reading. Through the course of the videos we see that time has passed through the change of light and the passing of seasons. Here we are not taken to the liminal, to the edge of experience, but instead are exposed to the ordinariness of everyday ritual. In this allegory, we experience the passing of time. So, to conclude, in spite of his modern image making, Viola presents a traditional mode of engagement. In other words, we have to spend a long time looking at his works. Contrary to the tradition of instant gratification offered by the digital interface in the contemporary age, Viola offers very little to the spectator who expects immediate understanding. Engagement requires allowing the visual and auditory elements to unfold and cohere, thereby absorbing the spectator. This happens in Nantes triptych, for instance, where the 3 separate images signalling birth, middle age and death are accompanied by a soundtrack of crying, the movement of water and dying breaths in a 30-minute loop. It's only after continued viewing that the soundtrack envelops the 3 panels into a circular rather than linear narrative, which is how Viola wants us to interpret the temporal. This ritual of duration and absorption characterises the projective cycle of the work, as well as conveying its mystical aspects. Through constant and continuous viewing, we move to a deeper level of perception. Even though Viola's work is featured in public spaces, it invites private reflection. In a statement written in 1989, Viola proclaimed that the most important place where my work exists is not in a museum gallery, or in screening rooms, or on the television, and not even on the video screen itself, but in the mind of the viewer who has seen it. Viola's work gives the spectator the opportunity to suspend self-conscious viewing and to experience sense perception as a route to self-knowledge. So that's the end of Rena's talk, which I'm sure she would have read with more ad-libs and interesting comments that I could have done. And it sort of sets the scene, I suppose, in terms of Viola's broad reputation, the kind of things that people have said about it. You can tell that quite often Viola's work's not very cheery. However, we're now going to run this video, Red Tape, which is a very early piece from 1975, a video work transferred to DVD, which means that the sound quality, and you'll be used to this now if you're a regular attender at Clips, is not very good, right? But it's got a nice kind of analogue sound quality to it. We're going to watch the film. After that, we're going to pop up the questions that Rena thought might be good to discuss, but we're not going to try and answer them. We're going to have a drink at that point. Right? The good news is I think this video work is slightly less morose than some of the later pieces, in parts anyway. So sit back and enjoy. So please don't sit too far away and walk away. Come and sit down, everyone. Come sit down. So we've got a bit of time to talk about the film, and we also thought it might be interesting, since this is the last event, to talk a little bit about how these events happened and maybe ideas for further screenings next year. It'd be interesting sharing ideas about that with you. So, like I say, Rena, who got stuck in Darlington, sent us these questions. For those who came out, I was reading out her text that was the talk she was going to give at the beginning. So, I've never seen this film. I don't know how many people here had seen it before. It's kind of unusual, as I say, because it's so early. And there are maybe lots of things we could think about in relation to it. But did anyone have any responses to these particular things, or no interest in those particular questions and other things they wanted to say or pick up? Things that came up in your discussion? Yeah.
I think they kind of relate to each other in a way for me, is because they're all very playful. So he's obviously exploring something, but at the same time he's kind of having fun doing it. He's, it's all of them have a kind of performative element that he's, engaging in some kind of act, but at the same time that it doesn't feel too serious.
Yeah, no, I was saying to Chris when we were talking earlier that I found this. There was an element of humour and playfulness in the films which made them more palatable to me. Personally, I find Viola's later work quite difficult. I don't respond to it that easily. And this I found actually quite refreshing in that sense, particularly the comic beginning with the soul music on his freckles motif.
Well, in some ways the later ones, for me at least, were kind of lifeless because the weight of them was on the aesthetic, and it's all about light, and it's referencing religion and the Renaissance and looking back, and there's so much of that they feel quite tight, and then these kind of looseness or an edge to them.
I had no idea what was going on with the creamer.
It took me a while to realise what I was seeing in there was actually his reflection.
That's right.
Because I think the first couple of times I thought I was looking at the creamer.
Yeah.
And how it makes a kind of pattern in the coffee, and that was like the creamer, and then I realised no, that's the face.
I think there's also like an element of repetition. So the more you do something, the more you analyze it. And so the more you look into the cup, in the mug, the more you see the reflection. So you think about yourself. That's what I got. But I don't know if repetition is something good. Sometimes it's not. So.
Yeah, I think that's kind of true because, like having something repeated, it kind of invites you to analyse it more. But I found watching this, like with the coffee and other things, like watching the same activity again and again becomes meaningless after a while.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing where you're kind of being invited to deconstruct these really simple, everyday things that you do, but it kind of, I was left with the impression that I didn't really know what like coffee was by the end of watching that show.
You're just going to see Bill's face in every cup.
Yeah.
But I think it was also in the coffee one, is what was happening off screen as well because of the sound. Because he's like sawing something, but it doesn't. His face didn't look like he was sawing something, or maybe somebody else was sawing something.
Something sinister.
But the face in the cup is one of the things that does sort of relate to his later works.
Yeah.
Because of that kind of the liquid, the distortion, human images and stuff that does come in. But it is like a wholly different kind of playful version of that where it's playing to.
It reminds me of the Lauman photographs as well, that he did it when he was just sitting at the coffee table. There's something kind of sinister about it.
Because that's one of the things when you see an early work by an artist like this, you kind of read back into it, don't you, motifs that you know from the mature work. So when he was on the rotating swing or whatever it was he was sitting on in that sequence, you know, you became very aware of, I think Rena was talking about this in her text, of his body at the centre of the sequence, and that it became kind of a bit intense, you know, after a while. And you kind of, looking at that, then you think, oh yeah, now I can see why, or you can see that strand of his thinking. But when you look at, if you saw that from, again, sort of thought experiment, you didn't know it was Viola, I don't know if you would get that at all.
I personally didn't. I don't know as much what he says on video, so yeah. I don't know if I got. I don't know if I saw the motifs that you're talking about.
I think you're
That
right.
was
You have to
definitely-
know that. You have to be looking
Yeah,
for it.
but that was definitely one of my favorite videos. The swinging, but from a visual point of view as well. At the end, it's very intense. But at the beginning, I didn't really know what was going on.
I spent a lot of time trying to work out what the apparatus was
Oh, yeah.
he was on.
Yeah.
Was it a roundabout or a swing?
Swing or a combination of the
Yeah.
two, exactly. And was there somebody on the other end of the time driving it around?
There's that kind of convention in film though, at the time, isn't there, of not quite seeing what's going on?
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
the mid-70s, I was thinking that Jaws probably was around the same time.
Yeah, that's, what was George, 75? Was that 75?
Yeah, it's at 75 as well.
Yeah.
These films. And what was that Rushy came up till last week, 75. It's a period of, you know, American independence and was kind of at the forefront.
You've also got films like Conversations. I mean, think
Oh yeah, yeah.
how the short films in this section are interrelated is the rhythm. Each particular film has got a specific rhythm, whether that's visual rhythm or whether that's, you know, playing with the sounds and the rhythm of the sound. And I think that's probably where later works he's really exposed the sound. But I mean, you know, see, he's the master of his tools of that era of filming with the camera that he used. Was this the first video camera he used? Was this the first sort of?
Now, I don't know the answer to that. Rena, who was meant to be here, who's the expert, offers everybody her email address, which I will read out in a minute, so you can email her and ask her such questions. Yeah,
It's
go on.
really interesting because what he's doing is he's really playing with that. It's like new technology. He's
Yeah,
playing
yeah,
with that, and especially in the film where you know it's like breathing with the day, the night, the day, the night, the day, the night. And if you get into that rhythm, it's like breathing. It's like the artistry or whatever it is. You know, but that was really clever. I thought at that time probably because of the he's playing with the apparatus and his his tools, his art, what he's using at that point. And because there wasn't many people creating video artists at that point. It was a new medium. So I think that's how the interlaces is the rhythm.
Yeah. I thought that Million Things sequence, was amazing actually, and what it made me think of, and again I don't know about how that enters into mainstream horror cinema, but it was very like devices that get used in more recent horror cinema. This kind of intense jumps of time and sort of disturbances, slight disturbances in the image and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
again, I suppose in a way, obviously something like Blair Witch. Which
Yeah, exactly.
Back to, that was like, oh my god, this is like,
VHS kind of.
No, actually, it's just
Yeah.
back to
Yeah.
jarring the video and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which does make it, intense.
It's one of just going back to what you're saying about the video camera. I mean, it's one of the. It's the same in Nauman. You mentioned Nauman earlier, that you get that feeling of these people working with a brand new technology and actually really trying to do some, exploring what it can do. And it's a very exciting moment. I think that a lot of those things have us very.
A lot of it reminded me of the very first time I got a video recorder at art college 10 years ago, and basically doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Exact experimentation.
That's what I was just saying. That's 1975, but it doesn't matter if it's like 2005.
Yeah.
It's the first time you think,
Use
what
it.
can I do with this?
Yeah.
What are the tricks you can come up with, or what can you cut out or add in through video?
But that thing that Rena was talking about in her text of sound image was very striking in this film, to my mind, all right through. And that was one of the things you felt he was doing. He was very acutely interested in or aware of, which is completely different to Nauman. Nauman's interest is kind of existential, the real-time character of his performance. Whereas these were a lot of them were really edited, weren't they? There was lots of jump cutting and all that stuff. Were there has anyone got any other answers to the exam questions? It's exam season at the moment, by the way. Metaphors of the self, I'm not sure. Life is a coffee cup. Spoon.
I felt there was, for me, a strong narrative in the coffee one, in that, as someone already said, the primary action is happening off screen, and so I found myself less interested in the reflection and more interested in just sort of imaginatively constructing what he could possibly be doing. And then towards the end of it, he was also sort of laughing in this really sort of like annoying way. So there was definitely something very filmic about that sort of allusion to narrative.
What about the freckles? Because that was the closest thing to a sort of body art performance moment, where we, the camera tracked back and we saw his torso, and you could see him moving at that sense of the physical effect of the disembodied loudspeaker thing on his back and so on. And it was also a weird viewpoint, right? So it was cropping his head, shot from above, and sort of above his head looking down. And it, I suppose you wonder about, again, what's the position of, because there was, I think it's metaphors of the self, I don't know if a metaphor, but at least these early films seem to move between that kind of sense of performance and a much more narrative or orchestrated
A lot of
cinematic
seem
effect.
like they're very informed by that era of performance art.
Yeah, they do.
His behaviour, but he doesn't seem entirely comfortable as the performer. So it sort of makes sense that then what he got from it, in a way that, say, when we watched the Ruchet films last week, is that we didn't see what Ruchet might have gotten from that would have convinced him to move further into film, whereas Viola wasn't maybe as interested in the performance, but was interested in the capabilities of the editing and the manipulation of the image.
Yeah. Because the Ruchets were really interested in narrative, weren't they?
Yeah, it was all narrative.
Yeah.
In
Crazy
this,
narrative.
In this, you can see what he felt he could add to that era of performance art.
Using narrative before it's cinematic in a traditional sense, I think.
Yeah.
also felt really manipulated as the viewer in the first and last ones when he used like a zoom out in a very similar way. In the first one, like I wasn't sure what part of his body we were seeing, and then he midway through zooms out and it becomes a little more clear. And then in the last one, there's that moment when you think it's almost over, and then he zooms out and you realize that we're like only halfway through this sort of like ritual. So I thought that was really some fascinating manipulation of the viewer.
Yeah.
Which he was like, very, very aware of what he was doing.
Yeah, he's letting the viewer run away with their own narrative before he then puts you in check. So actually, this is my film, and this is what I'm doing, I'm the artist, you know. But I think it's not a conventional narrative. He's reinventing a narrative, or you know, whatever he was trying to. I mean, he might have just not even known what he was doing and just played around, and therefore we all talk about it now. But you know, could have just been happy accident. Do you know what? Yeah, I'm happy with that. Go with it and move to play with it. So it is letting us create our own narrative.
But each film has an idea, right? Each of the five has an idea. So, right, I'm going to do this thing with the bell and approaching.
Or he's used,
yeah, or whatever it is, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, what's again, when you read back from what he does later, you get that sense of the triptych or the polyptychs. You know, it's kind of making these discrete films that are juxtaposed in a way. I mean, you know, it says how are they interrelated? The question is, are they interrelated? You know, in a way, and they're interrelated in virtue of being put into this structure, but that sort of just asks weird questions, really. The coffee cup and the bell, you know, and that for me that's like a space where you can fill that with all sorts of, how can I put this, in an unkind way, you know, bogus spiritual content or something, you know, that it's possible to read into that stuff, you know, like you said.
Yeah, and it could be just what's to hand at that time.
Yeah, or it's saying that it's meaningful. It's telling us it's meaningful. Yeah. It's a different thing because, as I say, I'm not that sympathetic to him as an artist in a way. So
I think that's the problem with his work. It does tell us there's a meaning, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a sense of claustrophobia in those early films that I think that he does carry on through the later work.
Yeah. The first one I saw was the Room for St John of the Cross. I don't know if anyone's seen that, which is a kind of installation thing. It was in 1983 in the Saatchi collection. And it's kind of like a box with a window in it. You look in the window and there's a little room that's got, I don't know, a jug and something else, a book or something, and you can hear in Spanish St John of the Cross reading his gospel, his text, and it's this very kind of, you know, again, claustrophobic, spiritually meaningful thing. I think that's probably the point at which I thought, I can't deal with this guy. But there's no doubt that he's
hugely popular. Like the exhibition that Anthony Locke had at his gallery was the biggest show he ever had. At that gallery, there was queues famously for miles trying to get into the show.
And it is, I mean, Rena mentioned that idea of the sublime, that was a very 80s thing, wasn't it? You know, this kind of big art that was big and impressive and high tech. That was, you know, it was part of that moment. I mean, maybe his popularity in terms of this discourse of spirituality, and also, you know, you can think of the Rothko thing. You know, with Rothko, that idea of the meaningfulness of the Rothko room and its popularity also revolves in part around that kind of that sense of the effect of the spirituality. Anyway, one thing we thought would be good to do as well would be to ask Tom and Noi and Olivia to talk a bit about how they came to put this programme together, these 4 films, as a prologue to asking you what things you might like to see if we run some more screenings next year. Films obviously by artists in the Art Streams collection, though I'm sure we could up to a point I can look and reveal on that. But Tom, I don't know, can you tell us sort of how this worked out?
Yeah, well, it was quite. We didn't really have a plan going into this. You know, we were given a blank slate pretty much about what we could do. All we were told was that we had to show films made by artists in the Artist Rooms collection. I think so. Me, Noy, and Olivia sat down and we watched a lot of very weird stuff.
How did you watch it? How did you get access to it?
Ruth Burgon, Ruth Burgon, whose idea it was to do this film program. She had what was the name of the website?
Yeah, I think this is where we got.
Yeah, there was this website where you can log on if you pay a minimum subscription fee, and you can watch loads of artist films. So we sat down and we watched quite a few. And yeah, Red Tape was one of the films we saw. We didn't actually watch any of the others ourselves. We had those films recommended to us by various people. But I think what we wanted to do with the program was to show a range of different kinds of films. So we have kind of the weird, visceral, sick film from Martin Creed, and we had Ed Ruscha, who's maybe a bit kind of more accessible to like a non-artistic audience because there's some kind of narrative there. And then we had the weirdness of Bill Viola and Andy Warhol. We thought would be a good famous artist to invite people into the program.
But all the films you've shown aren't sort of the well-known ones.
Yeah.
You know, everything's a little bit obscure, right?
Well, yeah, but I think that's always going to be the case.
Maybe the Creed ones are quite well.
Yeah, I suppose the Creed is the exception, isn't it?
Yeah. So I don't know if anybody has any suggestions for the films they'd like to see in the future.
I think everybody in the room should make one next.
Sorry? Sorry?
I think everybody in the room should make one next.
Do they have to be artists in the artist room collection?
That's why we're here, yes. Though I guess one could imagine extending the curatorial idea, and you could have a film by an artist rooms artist, and you could juxtapose it with a film by an artist who worked alongside them or with them or in the same period. You know, that could also be interesting. The double bill, because you could think about interpreting the work of some of these artists, you know, in relation to what other artists were doing. So I don't think we could rule out the idea that we could show non-artist rooms things, but at its core, what we're here to do is to focus on the collection. Yeah. And somebody mentioned Lawrence Weiner last week.
Well, I saw an original list as well. I think Agnes Martin was on there.
Yeah. We had a very good cafe on Agnes Martin.
I think,
quite nice
I think we were intending to show Gabriel.
Yeah.
But we didn't have enough money.
Or was there license fee attached to it?
Well, we just have to pay, like rental and shipping and all that stuff.
So these films, I mean, the Ed Ruscha and the Warhol came from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, was flown here from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the Ruscha came from Gagosian in Los Angeles, that's right, isn't it? So they had, we flew in these 16mm prints of those films, so they were quite rare. And unusual. So, again, that's part of the opportunity really to do that, rather than necessarily always showing things that are on DVD and more pretty accessible. I love the 16mm thing.
Yeah.
So there was costs associated with those two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't deal with that personally.
Olivia's the cost person.
You paid for it.
It's been exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it was worth it though in relation to Horse definitely and Ruscha to get them here to have the 16mm and to arrive in a crate. I think that what's been kind of enlightening for me anyway is this idea of the different materialities of all the different kinds of films. So like with the 16mm, that's obviously it's quite obvious in the sense that they're the traditional film, but even with watching this, you can get a sense of how maybe it was recorded originally. There's that kind of blurry quality. So
Poor sound quality.
Yeah, exactly. And whereas the Mark Creeds were more recent and therefore a kind of
That was one of the
finished
interesting things about the Rushes. He talks about how he gives up film because he's frustrated with it as a medium because it can't reach a lot of people. But it's because he works in a very particular way with it.
Yeah. How wrong he was. So we really would welcome, people's suggestions. The Artist Rooms Research Partnership programme of events, the cafes and this film streaming programme, was absolutely delivered by this team of MSc interns, not by me. I just give them the money and say get on with it. And actually this one in particular had to make a lot of decisions, themselves about how to shape the programme and the atmosphere they wanted to create and so on. So they've done a fantastic job on that. There'll be a new team of MSc interns with the Artist Rooms Research Partnership next year, but we'll be looking in a way to programme in some events in advance for that team to pick up. And certainly I think I personally would like to see this programme continue. I think it's been great.
So can we email you suggestions?
You can. Or Facebook us, yes, you can communicate with us, that's true. If you're a friend, if you like our Facebook page, you can say something to us on Facebook, if you know how to do that. So thank you very much, everybody. And well done, fantastic job.